Hey everybody, welcome to the DDC Studios YouTube channel. This is DDC Studios owner and publisher David Hayner, and today's video is the beginning of a multi-part video series where we are going to examine the secret origin of DDC Studios. But before we get that underway, we do have our usual housekeeping items we need to take care of. If you haven't subscribed already to the channel, please hit that subscribe button and don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. And also hit the like button if you are enjoying this video. And also please feel free to leave a comment down below, as both Dylan and I really appreciate any and all feedback that you find folks can give us. Alright, now with that out of the way, let's get started talking about how this mini comic studio came into being. And I will kind of warn you, this series could run a few episodes, because this actually dates all the way back to 1997, 1998. And I'm pretty much fresh out of high school, and a new comic shop has opened up in the town neighboring my hometown. Strangely enough, the one that I currently live in. And it was this little comic shop called Powerhouse Cards and Comics, run by a couple of guys, James and Dana. They did sell more than just comics. They did sell a few baseball cards, and they were also pretty big in the collectible card game scene, specifically Magic the Gathering. They also handled some of the other games of the day back in the day, like your Vampire the Masquerade, Rage, Star Wars and Star Trek, all those golden oldie collectible card games that basically, with the exception of Magic the Gathering, died out years and years and years ago. But what really drew me in there, of course, was the comic books. Because before then, I had visited a couple of the comic shops up in Des Moines, but it was very sporadically. So I was still, even at that point, relying on getting my comics essentially from the newsstand. Yes, the fabled thing that all of us old-timers like to talk about. What was the thing still way back in those golden years. So basically, I got what I got. There wasn't even any guarantee that, if I got, say, June's issue of Superman, the next issue of Superman I might come out in December or January. But the cool thing about James and Dana was they didn't have a new release wall, but they did order comics. So you could get a pull list, and guaranteed you get comics, month in and month out, every single issue, never missing an issue, and, boom. They also had, the fabled back issue table with long box upon long box of cheap-ass back issues that I pillaged usually on a weekly basis. Now that I've kind of set the scene, I wasn't the only comic nerd that frequented Powerhouse. There was two other dudes that were there even more than I was, Chad and Ross. But because all three of us hung out there and spent a lot of time together, we became fast friends. Chad was your stereotypical comic dude. He wasn't a full-blown nerd like I was, but he was a dyed-in-the-wool comic geek, all about Marvel Comics, which was kind of good, good yin to my yang, as I was, an old-school DC and then an Image guy at that point in time. And then the third member of our little triumvirate was Ross. Ross, if you're familiar with professional wrestling at all, Ross kind of resembled the love child of Mick Foley. He was a big dude, with long curly brown hair that was usually down in his eyes because he was almost always hunched over the table drawing. Didn't talk a whole lot, but when he did, usually it was a wisecrack, normally at mine or Chad's expense. So automatically he endeared himself to me because, anybody that's willing to make fun of others while also getting made fun of, they're okay in my book. But after a few weeks of hanging out with these guys, I finally couldn't take it anymore, and I asked Ross what he was constantly drawing, because he was hunched over, so you could catch some glimpses here and there, and but you couldn't quite tell exactly what he was working on. But as soon as I did that, he kind of grunted a little bit, reached down into his backpack, pulled out what I would soon discover within moments was my very first look at a mini comic. See, Ross, since the early years of his high school, produced his own mini comic called Black or White, that was kind of an alternate retelling of the Civil War era America, and specifically the Reconstruction era. And it was kind of his obsession. And I fell in love with it. Yes, the writing was crude, the art was crude, as Ross had no formal training. But there was just something about that. I honestly had very little exposure, well, technically no exposure to mini comics of this type. I knew what an ash can was, but those even were a lot more professionally made than the mini comics we all know and love, because this was a photocopied and stapled together affair. And I just, like I said, I was enamored, right away. Well, over the next few years, the three of us, Chad, Ross, and I, basically became inseparable. We not only hung out at Powerhouse Cards and Comics, but we took weekly, if not, or weekly to bi-weekly fanboy trips, as we called them, up to Des Moines to hit the local comic shops up there as well. And, we went to movies, played Dungeons and Dragons together, hung out and watched wrestling. We really were inseparable. And then the fateful day came that we all decided to hit the Iowa Comic Con. This was honestly my very first comic book convention I'd ever been to. I'd been to a few comic book shows, like at the VFW, where you had like a half a dozen vendors there, nothing special, but this was an honest to God comic book convention. And the reason why this was such a big deal, other than the obvious, it being my first one, was of course it was my first exposure to Artist Alley. Now, Artist Alley at the Icon had a few, well-known to semi-well-known comic book artists, but more importantly, it contained I guess you call it the small press creators of Iowa, and there was a 50-50 split there. Half of the guys were making those typical style comic books, but the other half were making mini comics. And to be perfectly honest, in 1998, 99 type dollars, I dropped $50 on mini comics there, which was a ton at the time. The reason why I spent so much money is I literally bought one of everything I could get my hands on. I was not picky. I literally went from table to table, picking one of everything up off the table and saying, okay, how much do I owe you? Okay, awesome, here you go. Boom. Off to the next table I went. And those two events really solidified my love of the mini comic. Because at the same time, in between those two, Wizard actually also started, Wizard, the Guide to Comics, the magazine, would also feature mini comics from time to time. So I got a little more exposure, but it was going to that very first Icon that, gave me this huge first stack of comics, mini comics, that I still have every single copy of them to this day in my collection. And that's actually kind of a good place to stop part one is the birth of my love of the mini comic. And then in part two, that's where things get a little more serious as far as starting to create comics. But you're going to have to wait a couple more days to hear about those stories. So as always, thank you ever so much for listening to me ramble on about mini comics. Please, once again, if you haven't subscribed already, hit that subscription button and ring the bell for notifications. Also, please feel free to share this video on social media, as just like mini comics, we really do rely on word of mouth to help this channel grow. And speaking of mini comics, if you are interested in checking out any of the mini comics that DDC Studios currently has in print, just hit that Webstore link down below in our description, where you can pick up every single issue of DDC Studios mini comics, along with picking up some original art, whether they be sketch cards or sketch covers. And you can also commission a sketch card of any subject you so choose. And also, if you would like to, you can really support DDC Studios by hitting our t-shirt shop, where you have your choice of 3 different official DDC Studios t-shirts. You have your choice of the official DDC Studios logo t-shirt, the domain logo t-shirt, and the Black Owl emblem cosplay t-shirt. All 3 of those t-shirts are available in all sizes and are just $20 a piece. And also, you can follow us on both Twitter and Instagram, where you can check out all of our updates and behind-the-scenes look at up-and-coming comic books. So, once again, thank you ever so much for listening. We'll have part 2 of the secret origin of DDC Studios hitting you here in just a couple more days. Thanks a lot. Bye.